Some people just work better as a duo. It doesn't matter if it's Laurel and Hardy or even Bert and Ernie, there's just a cross-section of characters who should never go solo if they can avoid it. And the same can be said for the world of wrestling too, which is exactly why whenever a popular tag team splits up, it's a coin toss as to whether or not it'll work out. But what are the biggest examples of tag team splits not working out? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. And where better to start than with the time the WWE tried to split up the Dudley Boys in 2002. Yes, in a moment no one wanted to see, as part of the first brand extension that year, Vince McMahon felt it would be good to shake things up a little by splitting some popular tag teams. But while this ultimately worked out well for the likes of the APA, it didn't have the same impact when it came to Bubba Ray and Devon, as they quickly discovered that they were dead in the water without one another. Okay, maybe they weren't completely dead in the water. After all, Bubba Ray, the man who was clearly being set up as the new project, did manage to find some level of success on Raw when he became a multiple-time hardcore champion. That said, he never really managed to make it to the main event level Vince McMahon was hoping he would. And when it came to Devon over on SmackDown, things would go even worse. Why was that? Well, because under the new gimmick of Reverend Devon, the former tag team champion failed to get out of first gear and almost immediately became an afterthought on Thursday nights. Hell, the only memorable thing about the character at all now is that it's the one which first introduced us to Dave Bautista. So it was probably for the best then that in late 2002, Devon would be moved over to Raw and there reunited with Bubba Ray. And thankfully, that's the way they remained for the rest of their time in WWE. Sure, once they ventured over to TNA a few years later, they'd end up splitting up all over again, but this time it worked out a lot better, so no one was really as bothered at that point. No, by then, they were more concerned with another team. A team who, well, not exactly world beaters, had been a solid enough mid-card act in the WWE. So when Vince McMahon made the decision to split the primetime players up in 2014 then, everyone just kind of collectively groaned. But then why wouldn't they, as Titus O'Neil and Darren Young worked perfectly well together, so it was clear that they were stronger as a pair. In fact, we struggle to think of any good reason to sever their partnership at this time, other than because it was early 2010s WWE, and the boss couldn't let any team stay together for too long. It certainly wasn't done so either of the two could get pushed to the moon as a single star, because after their split, both just kind of wallowed, with Young getting stuck in mid-card feuds against the likes of Damien Sandow and Fandango, and O'Neil almost immediately finding a new partner anyway, in the form of Heath Slater. Really, it was completely nonsensical in hindsight, especially as the primetime players still had plenty of juice left in their act yet, given the fact that they never won tag team titles. And with Darren Young only having recently come out a few months prior, making him the first openly gay performer in WWE history, there was certainly a story to tell there of him and his best friend reaching for the gold now that he was able to fully be himself. But that's not the path WWE chose in the end. No, instead, they'd let the two go their own separate ways for a while, killing any momentum the team had to the point that when they inevitably reunited in February of 2015, people just didn't care as much anymore. Hell, even them finally winning the tag team titles this time around didn't have anywhere near the impact it should have because fans had already seen the team split and fail to get over by themselves. Luckily though, in the years following, both would be able to rehabilitate this image, with O'Neil doing so by serving as a brand ambassador for WWE, and Young doing so by venturing out to Japan and the NWA, where he currently wrestles as Fred Rosser. And they're not the only team who got a chance to make things right after a disastrous breakup, because the same thing has since happened with another former WWE duo, and that's Enzo and Big Cass. Well, we say it's happened with Enzo and Big Cass, but what we really mean is that it's happened with the latter. After all, following a period of being so deep in addiction that he almost died at an indie show when he had a severe seizure, the man formerly known as Colin Cassidy has since recovered and rebuilt himself to the point that he's now one half of the AEW Tag Team Champions alongside Ricky Starks. As for Enzo, well, while the jury is still out on his future, he certainly has the talents on the mic to get himself over if he's given a chance. And we know that because it was exactly these skills which helped both him and Cass to become such a big success on WWE TV back in the mid-2010s. It didn't matter if it was on NXT or the main roster, with Enzo serving as the voice and Cass serving as the muscle, the pair of New Yorkers were so over at one point it seemed inevitable that they were going to become champions before long. Unfortunately though, before they could do this, Vince McMahon decided he'd seen enough of their act and so chose to split them up. With him at this time positioning Enzo as the new face of the Cruiserweight division, all while having his now former partner move on to opponents such as Daniel Bryan. How would this work out for them? Not great if we're being honest, because as it turned out, if you took one away from the other, something pretty major was lost. And it's for that reason that both men's singles runs could be described as failures. So thank God WWE saw the error of their ways and decided to reunite the pair shortly after then, right? Well, no, because that didn't happen either. Rather, Enzo and Big Cass wouldn't team up again until after both had been fired from the Fed in 2018, and they from there ventured out onto the Indies together. And of course, given the fact Cass now works as Big Bill and has an all-new partner, you can probably guess how well that reunion went, with it not being able to recreate the same magic the second time around. Who knows though, maybe there's still a chance of another reunion one day if Enzo ever becomes All Elite, just as there's always the chance our next two subjects could reunite should Age Outlaws ever join AEW. Who are we talking about this time? Why, the Team WWE should have never split up in 2018, of course, Rusev Day! That's right, back in the mid-2010s, there were few acts in WWE who were more over than the pairing of Rusev and Age Outlaws. Why was this? Well, because Rusev was then, and remains today, a powerhouse with real main event potential. Hell, so impressive is he that he was able to take a ridiculous gimmick like every day being his own day and turn it into one of the most popular things in all of wrestling for a while. And as for Age Outlaws, well, he added that final touch onto the whole thing by basically serving as his tag team partner's herald during this run. Yes, whenever the son-in-law of the late great Eddie Guerrero came out to the ring with a mic in hand and asked live crowds what day it was, you knew it was only moments until the Bulgarian Brute made his entrance. Unfortunately though, despite them being megastars in waiting, Vince McMahon just didn't seem to get what Rusev and English were doing, which was why at one point he even mocked the former United States champion backstage by telling them the fans were only chanting for him ironically, not because they actually liked him. And since he felt this was the case, it was always only going to be a matter of time until he split the pair up, with this ultimately happening in the autumn of 2018, as it was then the Chicago native turned on his partner. Why would he do such a thing? Well, because he was jealous of his partner being the main focus of the group, then he also apparently had a thing for Rusev's wife Lana, too. Yes, one of the best duos in modern-day WWE were split up in another bad romance angle. At least you can't say Vince McMahon wasn't consistent in his questionable booking during his latter days. Still need more evidence of Triple H taking over as head of creative being the best thing to happen to the Fed in years? Well, how about the fact that despite being pretty much the only full-time women's tag team in the company, the Iconics were split up for no good reason in 2019. Yes, there wasn't a great deal of logic in this one. After all, with the company only having recently introduced their women's tag team titles back then, you'd think they'd have wanted as many acts as possible that could fight over them. And given pretty much every other women's team in WWE at this point was a makeshift one of two random people stuck together, the fact that the Iconics had been together since day one should have made them an even higher priority. That's right, the pair's excellent character work and their bratty Mean Girls gimmick made them a regular fixture on SmackDown throughout the latter half of the 2010s. Hell, at one point, WWE even went with them as tag team champions for a while after they beat the Boss and Hug Connection, Nia Jax and Tamina, and Beth Phoenix and Natalya for the honor at WrestleMania 35. That said, once they lost those belts, and from there got drafted over to Raw, it quickly became clear that their days were numbered as dissension within the ranks began making itself known. And that all eventually led to them losing a tag match against the Riot Squad, then being forced to disband as a result of a pre-match stipulation. How did their subsequent solo runs go? Well, we can answer this by telling you that by the summer of 2021, both would be released from the company. That's right, while there was a brief attempt to make a solo Peyton Royce a big deal, it just wasn't the same without Billie Kay by her side, as the two always had excellent chemistry together. And sadly, by the time WWE realized this, it was already too late. Still, at least they would get to reunite as a pair over in Impact for a while as the Inspiration, all before Rice took a leave of absence from the industry to have her first child. So at least there's a happy ending there then. It's just a shame the same can't be said about our next subjects though, because once they were split up, things never fully recovered. Who are we talking about this time? Why, who else but Rikishi and Too Cool. Where do we start with the breakup of Too Cool? After all, in the trio of Rikishi, Grandmaster Sexay, and Scotty 2 Hotty, you had one of the most over acts in the entire Attitude Era. And considering this is the same era that gave us megastars like Steve Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley, and Triple H, that's quite an achievement. Honestly, in any other time period, this probably would have been a mid-card act at best, but something about them in this moment in time just clicked with fans in such a major way that after a while it became undeniable they were headed all the way to the top of the card. So this is why it was so disappointing then that in the autumn of 2000, the story of Rikishi and Too Cool came to a crashing end when the former turned heel after revealing he did it for The Rock. Yes, in a move precisely no one was begging to see, the big man ended up being booked to be the man who ran over Stone Cold in kayfabe the year before, a decision which made absolutely no sense when you consider the fact he wasn't even on the main roster at this point. But it wasn't just the fact the former Intercontinental Champion was now a heel which made this one of the worst booking decisions of the era. No, it was also the fact that Grandmaster Sexay and Scotty 2 Hotty remained babyfaces. And because of that then, they would no longer be aligned on screen with their third man, and all the fun people had watching them dance their way to success week in and week out came to an end with immediate effect. But at least things worked out well for Rikishi as a solo act going forward, right? Well, no, because so badly would his heel turn end up going, he wouldn't even make it onto the card when WrestleMania 17 happened a few months later. And as for his now former tag partners, they wouldn't fare much better either, because without the Samoan by their side, they quickly fell into irrelevance once more, with Grandmaster Sexay being released from his contract altogether not long after. Still, at least they had some good times together while they were united as a trio, and that's what people should remember them for at the end of the day, just as they should remember our next subjects for their glory days and not for their bad breakup. That's right, it's time to talk about the Road Warriors. Yes, arguably the most famous and highly regarded duo to ever do it. After all, there's a reason the phrase Road Warrior Pop was created during the 80s, and that was to describe the absolutely monstrous reaction they got every time they came through the curtain, whether that be on the territory circuit, out in Japan, or even in 90s WWF. So over were they, in fact, it seemed unthinkable anyone would ever want to split them up, but that's exactly what happened in 1998 when the pair were working for Vince McMahon. What happened here exactly? Well, after Droz was introduced to the team, he began driving a wedge between the pair, with this leading to them eventually coming to blows. To be fair though, there was a reason this was done at that particular time, and it's because it was right at the peak of Hawk's addiction issues. So, worried that he may have to cut bait on the legendary tough guy, the boss brought in Droz as a potential replacement for the Minnesota native, and this turned out to be quite a prophetic decision in hindsight. Not that it made the angle any less tasteless when Hawk's addiction issues were used in a storyline to justify the split though, and it didn't make it any less difficult for fans to accept the newcomer as a replacement now partnering up with Animal. So it's just as well the pairing would be relatively short-lived then, and before all was said and done, the original Road Warriors would reunite to have one more final legacy run together. But what of the team who served as such an excellent foil to Hawk and Animal during the late 90s, the New Age Outlaws? After all, they had their own split in 1999. Well, in case their placement in this video hasn't already made it obvious, this was also a move which has since been remembered as a pretty poor one in hindsight. And the reason this one is remembered so poorly is because for the most part, neither Road Dogg nor Billy Gunn excelled as a solo act. No, they were pretty much made to be a part of a tag team, and that tag team was all the better if it was named the New Age Outlaws. Sure, there was an argument to be made at the time that Billy Gunn could have become a solid main eventer in the singles division if he was just given a chance to reach this level, but one promo from The Rock in the lead up to that year's SummerSlam pay-per-view very quickly put an end to any hopes of such a thing happening. And when it came to Road Dogg, well, he was never going to get over all by himself, as it just wasn't his forte. So with that in mind, it just makes you wonder what was going through Vince McMahon's head then, when in May of 1999 he had Gunn turn on his partner and end not only their alliance as a two-man group, but also their role in D-Generation X. Surely he didn't think this was what was best for all parties involved. Well, whether he realized it at the time or not, he soon understood the mistake he'd made, and so that was why, just a few months later, he'd paired the Outlaws back together once more. Though this time, they'd spend most of that run as a heel act when they joined the reformed DX. And after their time in WWF came to an end, they'd continue to work together in TNA as well, as by this point, everyone knew where their strengths lay. Sure, it stands right now with Billy Gunn working in AEW as Daddy Ass and Road Dogg being a producer in WWE. It doesn't look like a new reunion will be coming anytime soon, but then you can never say never in the world of wrestling. Hell, with advance in medical technology, maybe we'll even see Tyson Kidd come out of retirement one day to revive his team with Davey Boy Smith Jr. and Natalya, something which would no doubt make up for the Hart Dynasty's terrible split in 2010. Of course, what makes the Hart Dynasty split even more nonsensical is that they were pretty much on top of the world at the time they were separated. Hell, mere months before they were forced to go their separate ways, they were riding high as the pair who ultimately went down as the last ever unified tag champs in WWE, up until the Usos did the same in 2022. But alas, even this wouldn't be enough to stop the dreaded curse of 2010's WWE-based tag teams who couldn't go longer than a few years without coming to blows, as that was the fate of just about every duo who was in WWE at that point. So it was then that, after losing their gold to Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre at September 19th, 2010's Night of Champions pay-per-view, the seeds were sown for their eventual split. And this split would ultimately come on the November 15th episode of Raw that same year, when Kid turned heel on his partner and severed their union forever. What happened to them following this? Well, as you probably guessed, it didn't go too well. No, Davey Boy Smith Jr. failed to get over as a solo act, and as a result would be released from his contract soon thereafter. And as far as Tyson Kidd and Natalya went, it wouldn't be long before they were in another team anyway, this time with Cesaro, making fans wonder what the point of the Hart Dynasty split had been in the first place. Then, to make matters worse, Kidd suffered a serious spinal injury in 2015 while wrestling a match against Samoa Joe that's meant to this day he's never performed in the ring again. So even if Smith were to be rehired by WWE at any point, it's honestly unlikely they'll ever revive their old partnership. And it's also a case that we are never going to see our next subjects in the ring together again either, as, after Crime Time had split in 2010, one half of the ranks, Shad Gaspard, would tragically pass away in a drowning accident. Before this happened though, the pair were one of the more entertaining parts of the WWE mid-card during the late 2000s. And that's because they knew exactly what to do in order to get over in the WWE system. In fact, it was this which led to them getting 2 full runs with the company, one between 2006 and 2007, and then again between 2008 and 2010. Sadly though, once the new decade hit, it was decided by management that their time as a pairing had run out, and so the decision was made to separate them here. How would this play out on screen? Well, basically it involved Shad Gaspard turning on JTG, then having a brief feud with his now former partner. Then, once that was over, the two would fully go their own separate ways, with each of their characters now feeling incomplete without the other. That's right, even though both members had huge potential as singles stars, particularly Shad, who could have been a monster giant in the main event scene, neither of the pair could catch a break. Sadly though, a reunion would never happen, and Gaspard would be released from the company altogether. As for JTG, well, he would stay around a little longer, all the way until 2014. And given how missed the pair were as a duo once they were pulled apart, you have to rank the dissolution of Crime Time as one of the biggest failed tag team splits in modern memory. But then, you could say the same of all the splits we've discussed today.